Today, the podcast, my guest, Noble Gibbs, former infantry officer, U.S. Army graduate from West Point, EQ practitioner, teacher of emotional intelligence, husband, dad, EQ Gangster, which I think I like really much. Welcome to the podcast, Noble.
Hey, thank you, Joe. It's great to meet you again. And thank you so much for having me on the podcast.
Well, thank you, Vina. I really do appreciate it. I'm kind of like that EQ Gangster. What is an EQ Gangster? I mean, I feel like it's pretty cool. Yeah, I like that. The sign. Nobody can see it, but it's lit up like that. But how'd you come up with EQ Gangster?
So there are quite a few folks in this space, even though it's still, I feel, a budding industry and still lots of room to grow. There are not too many bald, bearded, big, tattooed guys in the space. And so one of my friends says, bro, when I ever talk about you or your podcast, he said, I always call you, dude, this guy is a gangster on EQ. And I'm like, he's like, dude, you got to be the EQ gangster. So I said, wow, that's great. Let me rock that. So that's how it came about.
Well, it's interesting too, is about emotional intelligence. What is EQ? I know what is EQ anyways?
Yeah, for sure. EQ literally is emotional quotient, which a lot of times is also just interchanged with emotional intelligence. And so they're very interchangeable. EQ or EI both refer to emotional intelligence. And how I would define that is the ability to identify, process, and manage your own emotions and also the emotions of others. So it's in this four main areas, categories of it, kind of in an industry standard. There's a lot of different industry emotional intelligence models, but the Daniel Goleman OG of emotional intelligence had four main areas or aspects: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, social management.
You know what? I can tie that into something right now. Snowboarding. I mean, I was looking up more preparing for this interview, and I noticed some pictures of snowboarding. I can see self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, because I don't want to crash into anybody, and management of feelings. Because when you go snowboarding, I know that I'm just from my experience getting a little bit too cocky on the trail. I'm like, this is a blue green. I could do this, and the trail always humbles me.
That's right. That's right. No, you're exactly right. It takes self-awareness and self-management and social awareness, and man, even sometimes social management on the slopes. You're exactly right. That's right.
Well, you live in Colorado, so I know there's a lot of good snowboarding places out there.
Oh, we love it. We've been here for 2 years now, and we've got in on both seasons. And because we're a homeschool family, we go during the week, and so we miss the big weekend crowds and the weekend rushes and the weekend long lines of people. So we go up like on a Wednesday, come back on a Thursday. We snowboard all day on Wednesday, snowboard all day on Thursday, and then come back. We're like about 2.5, 3 hours from any of the main slopes, and so we just love it. Very thankful.
Well, yeah, but I live in New Hampshire. We go a little bit north from me, that we have a little bit nice slopes out there. But I've always, as a snowboarder, I haven't done it in a long time, probably like over 20 years. Actually, no, probably a lot longer than that. And but I remember going to New Hampshire, and it'd be a dream to go out to Colorado, where the powder is and stuff like that. I mean, we get some good snow up here, and there's some good trails, but Colorado would be kind of fun. I can also remember being on the trails when they didn't like snowboarders. We weren't even liked. We were like almost like, what were you doing here?
Right. It's probably like the early skateboarders back in the day. Yep. No, we love snowboarding. My daughter and I, she's 13. My daughter and I snowboard, and then my wife skis.
Yeah, I'm just not that coordinated. I'm sorry. I can handle one thing. I can follow my butt, but handling, it's like handling my emotions. I have a hard time dealing.
That's right.
I got to deal with two skis and two poles and try to coordinate them and not crash into anything.
Right. That's right. I'm with you. I like snowboarding. Now, that being said, I am not a fancy snowboarder by any means. I'm a greens, maybe an occasional blues in there, and I do no tricks.
My goal is get from the top of the mountain, bottom mountain, without falling and breaking something.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. At my age, I'm the same way, Joe. I'm the same way.
Well, thank you much again. But we'll talk about social, emotional intelligence actually, and I kind of find it fascinating too. And that topic, how did you get involved in it?
Great question. So the story is, so my mom is a 4'10" little Hispanic lady, and my dad was a big giant white guy. So he was like 6'3", 6'4", 285. He was an ER doctor, very quiet, very calm, very chill guy. My mom, again, very, we call her the Tasmanian angel, and also the Energizer bunny. So in our house, growing up as a kid, we used to yell and scream at each other, and we'd stomp off into our respective corners of the house, come back and act like nothing happened. Hey, how's the weather? What's for dinner? How'd the Bears do today in football? But we would not talk ever about how, we'd have no conflict resolution. We would never apologize. We would never discuss emotions and feelings. And so I learned very early on how to stuff and avoid my feelings and emotions. And so, which led to a whole cascade of emotional issues. Just that decision, or that doing that thing alone, stuffing and avoiding, just led to a host of other problems and issues. And what happens is, when you, and that's where we learn our emotional foundation starts out in childhood. How many people do you know ever learn how to deal with emotions and feelings in our childhood? Most people don't. And so, and especially folks my age and in my generation, not many people ever learned how to deal with feelings and emotions in my generation. And so, and of course, when you have, and my parents didn't learn that stuff, that's why I didn't get taught it. And so you don't typically teach what you weren't taught. And so, boom, growing up, so that was my whole childhood, stuffing and avoiding. And then I go off to West Point. We're definitely not talking about feelings and emotions there. And then I went to Ranger School, which is the Army's elite weight loss program, is what I call it. Then I went to Airborne School and stationed in the 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Bragg. We're not, as an infantry officer, we're not talking about feelings and emotions there. Then I get in business and became an entrepreneur, 2 decades as an entrepreneur. And what happened was two things happened. In one of our business ventures, we came across a very hardcore narcissist. And I had never been exposed to narcissism before, or at least I wasn't aware of narcissism before, but this guy was just loved controlling and manipulating people. And everyone around him was kind of seen as, or viewed as, and treated as like his minions. And it didn't feel good at all to be on the receiving end of this guy, this narcissist. And about the same time, in a separate, totally nothing to do with the first thing, I yelled at my wife 3 times in 3 weeks. And she said, and after 20 years of marriage, and she said 3 things: Noble, number 1, don't ever do that again. Number 2, you've never done that before, which means number 3, you got more issues than Time Magazine. And so we went to counseling, because I'm like, you're right. I don't know what's going on. So we went to counseling, and this counselor introduced me to this revolutionary new concepts, Joe, called feelings and emotions. And I'm like, what is this cuss words? Like, what are feelings and emotions, man? What are you talking about? And what happened was, so as a little kid, so now let me give you the arc, the trajectory of that story emotionally. What happened was, as a kid, since I started out stuffing and avoiding my emotions, it started out as a cute, furry little emotional monkey. The more, after emotional injury, after emotional injury, after emotional injury, after emotional injury, they build on each other and they compound. One of my things that I say on my podcast all the time is, unaddressed emotional issues do not get better over time. They actually compound. And so as those emotional injuries compounded, think about this, Joe. I was doing 4 decades of stuffing and avoiding. Well, what that cute, furry, fuzzy little monkey turned into was an 800-pound gorilla that I could no longer stuff in the basement. And once that guy got to 800 pounds and I could no longer keep him locked in the basement, which I had been doing for my entire life, he got out and started swinging emotionally at, those around me. And what it looked like was, Now it looks different for everybody. For me, it looked like yelling at my wife 3 times in 3 weeks. It also looked like I was a people pleaser addict
Hmm.
for my entire life. I've been a food addict for my entire life. So those were ways that 800-pound emotional gorilla expressed itself in my life. Were a few of those different ways.
One thing I want to touch on is something you said is stuffing and avoiding. What did you mean by that?
Great question. So I call it the 4 emotional deadly sins. Is kind of what I call it. There's 4 things that are not good to do emotionally. 1 is stuffing, 2 avoiding, 3 stewing, 4 brooding. Stuffing, avoiding, stewing, and brooding. So stuffing is just stuffing the emotion. Like you're feeling some sort of emotion. It could be anger, it could be frustration, disappointment, sadness, rejection, uh, uh, heck, happiness. It could be any emotion that you're either not familiar with, uncomfortable with, and you just stuff it. You just bury it deep down inside your emotional basement in emotional vault, and you just lock it up. Another thing is avoiding, where and here's another thing too, because I was been a people pleaser addict, I would avoid conflict, right? So how another way that my stuffing and avoiding played out in my life was avoiding conflict at all costs, which led to me being taken advantage of a bunch of times, and because I was a nice guy, because I was a people pleaser addict. And so I would avoid feeling any emotions. As soon as I felt emotions, I would, again, let me get rid of this emotion. I want to block it off. I want to compartmentalize it so that I don't have to think about it or process it. So I would avoid feeling that particular emotion. And then stewing is where you're just sitting in this emotion, but you're not dealing with it productively. You're just marinating and marinating, and I'm angry, I'm angry, I'm angry, I'm angry, I'm angry, and you're not productively handling with or dealing with that particular emotion, and you just stew and brood. Is what happens a lot of times. It just turns into this spiral, this downhill spiral, that it originally starts out at this little, the a little pebble in your shoe, and that pebble in your shoe ends up wrecking your whole foot because you never dealt with that pebble in the shoe. Brooding can turn into this. I know for me, man, I've turned a mouse turd into a mountain because of just stewing and brooding. So those are what I call the 4 emotionally deadly sins of stuffing, avoiding, stewing, and brooding.
What was interesting too is you said you're a recovering people pleaser addict. I can say I'm a little bit like that too. What did you like? Can you give me an example? How'd you figure that out?
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple things. Again, not being able to, again, from childhood, I didn't know any other thing than stuffing and avoiding my emotions. And my mom is this amazing. She's still alive. My dad passed away 11 years ago. My mom's still around, and she's still the Energizer Bunny, the only grandma I know that wears out the grandkids. Like the grandkids, are like, Grandma, please put us to bed, because my mom is like a party in a person. Like just have her show up, and it's party time. And so I saw how she loves people, and now, unbeknownst to me, she also, I believe, has some people pleaser addiction or tendencies as well. So I saw this behavior, and I saw how much she loves people, and I saw the impact of how she treats and loves people, the impact on the people, and I saw
Mhm.
how it made them feel like, man, well, I want to do that too. I want to make people feel that way also. But my mom and our family, we also, one of the consequences of not being emotionally mature and having a lower emotional intelligence is having no boundaries. So
Mhm.
we had no family boundaries, we had no personal boundaries. And so my mom would always help a whole bunch of people out. They'd take advantage of her. She wouldn't care. She'd still take care of them, even though they're mistreating her and taking advantage of her in different situations and stuff. And same thing with my dad. He had no boundaries either because he just loved people as well. And so I saw kind of this behavior. I didn't see the unhealthy aspects. I only saw the healthy. Oh, I say healthy, but I saw the impact that it had on other people. And so I started to pick up these tendencies. But again, because I had no boundaries, no emotional boundaries, and no emotional maturity because I just stuffed and avoided my emotions, I started to seek out the approval and validation of other people for my identity and who I was. So as long as Joe Foley likes me and approves of me and validates me, then today is going to be a good day. But God forbid, if Joe doesn't like me or doesn't approve of me, then my whole world is wrecked today. And so, but you can't live like that because you're never going to make everyone happy. And so to have your identity wrapped around whether or not someone likes you or approves of you, or in today's cancel culture, oh man, if I get canceled, then that means I don't have value. No, that's ridiculous. Everybody has tremendous priceless value in who and how they were made and the skills that they bring to the world and the talents and the traits and the qualities. And so it wasn't until I started getting healthier emotionally and developed my emotional fitness program and got emotionally healthier that my people pleasing addiction started to go away. The other thing I noticed was, and this is just a few years ago, Joe, when I started my own emotional growth journey about 4 years ago now, I read this book by Urban Meyers, a Hall of Fame football coach. He was college football coach and for I think Florida, and he wrote this book called Above the Line. And midway through the book, he kind of shares, hey, this is my leadership philosophy. And it just kind of struck me. I'm like, well, what's my leadership philosophy? Like, and I study, Joe, I've read hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of books on leadership and, all this stuff for my entire life. And I thought, how can I not know or have my own personal leadership philosophy? But I realized when I went to West Point, I just took whatever West Point's leadership philosophy was. When I went to Ranger School, I took Ranger School. When I went to 82nd, here's the 82nd. I joined this business team. Oh, here's their leadership philosophy. And because I was a people pleaser, I just took everyone else's thoughts, opinions on what leadership means and never developed my own leadership philosophy. So here's another way it shows up is, what do you like? Well, I don't know what I like. Well, what do you like, Joe? Oh, I like whatever Joe likes. What a people pleaser looks like is like, this is old school reference here, Joe, Gilligan on Gilligan's Island. Oh, right? Oh, that's a good idea. Oh, no, that's a good idea. Oh, no, that's a good idea. Right? And you don't have your own thoughts. You don't have your own opinions. You don't have your own likes, your own dislikes, because you want to find out what everyone else thinks and likes before you come up with your own.
Well, people pleasing thing, it can also manifest, I think, sometimes in relationships too. Personal
Oh,
relationships like husband and wife. Because you want,
absolutely.
especially when things are going bad, like, you're in the really thick of things and things are not looking good for the marriage, and you do anything to kind of hold things together. So like, oh honey, you like this, I love it too, or you like this, I love it too. Keep hold the relationship too. What
Right.
I'm thinking too is something when you're speaking about it too, as a parent, I know that my son, it's a little bit different for me than when it was when I was growing up, but and I want to make sure I'm there for him. I tell him I love him, I'm proud of him. I'm glad you're here, because I'm a divorced dad myself. So when he's here, when I talk to him every night, I tell him I'm proud of him and stuff like that. Sometimes, well, I think I'm still seeking approval. Like, I didn't have that. I come from a divorced family, come from a lot of abuse, but I also look at it too. I didn't get that when I was a kid. So I was always thinking, I can relate to being a people pleaser person.
Absolutely, Joe. And look, I'm sorry that you have been through all of that through your childhood, and on into adulthood. That stuff, again, our so much of our emotional foundation gets built during our childhood. So for you to have a rough childhood, yeah. So number one, I am truly sorry, Joe, you've been through the different experiences that you've been through that have hurt you and injured you emotionally, and then how that has continued to play out in our lives. This is something, Joe, that a lot of guys don't realize. Not just guys, but women too. I've been a coach for many years, and of all the clients I've ever had, and I've worked with high school students to multi-million dollar CEOs of companies,
Mhm.
from teenagers to 60s and 70-year-olds. 100% of my clients, Joe, were exhibiting behaviors as an adult as a direct result of their childhood. So
Uh-huh.
I want to let you know you're not alone, right?
Mhm.
We all have behaviors that we do as adults as a direct result of our childhood. So that totally makes sense what you're saying, that you're probably subconsciously trying to get approval from your son and trying to get approval from other people. I 100% get that. That again, that was me for 99% of my life up until a few years ago.
Well, it's interesting too. When you're speaking about that, it reminds me a little bit of childhood, and always because I come up from a family of 4 kids, and always trying to get mom's attention. So I'll either be responsible one, or I do the thing. So people pleaser, and it's interesting to see when you're our age, and looking back, going, "Oh man, that's where it started from."
That's exactly right. And Joe, that is so huge, man. Just even the connections you're making right now in your brain, that is literally the beginning of the emotional growth journey, the emotional healing process, is just even making the connection of where did it come from. I call it the origin story of your emotional injuries, the of your behavior patterns. There's an emotional origin story, and it's so critical to make that connection from where did this come from? Why am I behaving like this? And there's a reason, there's an emotional reason that most of us are not self-aware of where it came from. So making those connections, Joe, is the first step, man, and that's huge.
What's interesting too is that I think as a parent myself is emotional intelligence do affect our parenting too.
Oh, Joe, absolutely. I mean, and for the examples that you said, wanting to get up and think about that, right? Because I was the same way. I was absolutely the same way, Joe. I was trying to get validation and approval from my daughter, and I didn't even know I didn't even realize I was doing it. I was trying to make sure she was always happy, and because she's an only child, and trying to make sure that everything's just right. And if she was upset, oh man, how can I get her so she's not upset? And it was all this me trying to control and manipulate the environment around my daughter so that she was always happy. Well, that's not real life. That's not setting her up for success. And so it wasn't until, like, here's another thing too. So my love language, so I'm not sure, there's a book called The Five Love Languages, and the five love languages are gifts, quality time, words of affirmation, physical touch, and acts of service. Those are the five love languages based on this book. And so my love languages are physical touch and words of affirmation. And so I would always give my daughter physical touch and words of affirmation. I'd always cuddle her on the couch. I'd always like to sit next to her. I'd always like to put my arms around her. Well, and I tell her how great she was and all this kind of stuff. And then as she got older, when she started to get like 11, she started to kind of push away. And it again, for a people pleaser addict, it wrecked my world because the emotion I felt, Joe, was rejection. And I told my wife, like, and I would get angry, Joe. I would get so angry because, again, inside, I was an emotional 5-year-old because I hadn't grown my emotions my entire life. I was still, because I had all these injuries. A lot of times, what happens is where and when we get injured emotionally, we don't grow past that if we have not taken the time to go back and heal that specific area. So I've been walking around as an adult, as an emotional 5-year-old, and I'm sure many of us know people and may be the people that are like that as well. And so, my wife said, "Noble, dude, you're trying to take your love languages because of this people pleasing addiction. You need you need." And because she's getting older, she's starting to increase her boundaries, her personal boundaries. And she said this, man, my wife body slammed me with this one. She said this, "Noble, if you don't respect her boundaries, no other man will either." And it just blew, and I'm like, oh snap, I have to change this and get this people pleasing addiction healed and fixed. Because it's not, and think about the responsibility, think about the emotional responsibility, Joe, that I am subconsciously placing on my daughter to meet my emotional neediness Think about how unhealthy that is,
Yeah.
right? That's totally not, I don't want to put that pressure on my daughter. That's not her responsibility. That's no, quite frankly, that's not my wife's responsibility, right? I need to be emotionally healthy enough where I can be in relationship but not be emotionally needy in that relationship, because now that will be projected and it's exhausting. I'm sure you've probably been around people that are emotionally needy. It's overwhelming. And I was that guy. I was the one who was emotionally needy in every one of my relationships, which ultimately pushes people away when we're emotionally needy.
It's just very interesting too and stuff like that. Funny thing you say, your daughter kind of pushes away a little bit. My son just turned 8, matter of fact. And do you need my help? No. You all set? No. Yeah, we fell down, and it happened actually yesterday. Where I dropped him off at camp, and he's walking down with the I don't know, the nurse, counselor, or whatever,
Yeah.
down to they meet the other people, and he falls down. He scrapes his knee, gets back up. I'm like, "You okay? You okay? I'm fine. You're all set, Dad. See you later."
Right. That's right. And he's starting to increase his boundaries. That's exactly what's going on.
It's just interesting to watch as a parent and stuff like that, because my like growing up is totally different. We grew up in a different era, and sometimes when parents are busy or they don't have their own issues that they haven't dealt with or anything like that, and they pass it on to us, and then we pass it on to them. So
That's right.
sometimes it's probably better to break the cycle if you can.
Oh, Joe, 100%, man. That's why you see addiction or alcoholism or abuse generational, because if no one breaks that cycle in the family, that injury is going to continue down the family line. But that's why it happens, because that's all you look. I only knew stuffing and avoiding my emotions. How could I teach emotional intelligence and emotional maturity and emotional health to my daughter when I don't have the first clue about emotional health and emotional intelligence, right? So you can't teach what you don't know. So when a generation is emotionally unhealthy, guess what? That is going to get passed on until someone in that family line says, no, the buck stops with me. I'm taking ownership of my emotions and feelings, and I'm going to be healthy emotionally so I can raise emotionally healthy people. One of my favorite quotes, Joe, is if you, and I, this is from episode 59 on our podcast. I interviewed a guy, how to have an emotionally healthy family. And the quote he gave me, and it's body slammed me ever since. He said, if you don't deal with your emotional issues, your children will.
Wow, that is kind of kicking the pants on that one.
That's right. That's right.
It's definitely interesting too. Like I'm like right now, I'm looking at something called emotional intelligence. If I could show it, I tell you, but it's high emotional intelligence and low emotional intelligence. And I found it kind of interesting too. Like high emotional intelligence, accept self and others. Low emotional intelligence is not accepting self and others. Also can communicate assertively, uses passive or aggressive communication, display empathy and lack of empathy. That thing, the one before, display empathy and lack of empathy, I'm not quite sure what empathy is. I don't know if you know what it is?
Absolutely. So I actually have um, a scientific and psychometric emotional intelligence assessment that I do with my coaching clients and also folks that are part of the EQ Mafia, which is our membership group. And there are this a psychometric and scientific assessment actually breaks down those four main areas I told you before, right? Self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, social management, into 15 different subscales. And one of those subscales in the interpersonal, there's well, I don't want to go into too much detail, but let me answer your question. Empathy falls under a category of emotional intelligence in our life called interpersonal.
Mm-hmm.
And empathy is recognizing, understanding, and appreciating how other people feel. Empathy involves being able to articulate your understanding of another's perspective and behaving in a way that respects others' feelings. That's empathy.
It's able to connect to them, be in their place where they are at that moment.
That's exactly right, Joe. That's exactly right.
like it's interesting. I always found that fascinating. Empathy and emotional intelligence, stuff like that. Right now, I know emotional intelligence is also tied into mental health, and that's a big deal right now, coming out of the pandemic and stuff like that. And I know mental health was important before, but I think it's more important now.
Oh, Joe, absolutely. And here's the thing, and here's my disclaimer. So I'm no psychologist, I'm no psychiatrist, I'm no therapist, I'm no counselor. What I have found is that, just from my own personal experience, is that most people have again, because of some of the dynamics that I've already shared, most people do not are number one are not very self-aware. One of the books I've read, 70% of people are not able to identify how they feel accurately in any given moment. 70%. Well, when you can't identify how you feel, when 70% of people are walking around having no idea how to accurately identify how they feel in any given moment, there's a very good chance that their self-management or emotional coping mechanisms are not going to be healthy or productive. So that's why we've seen so much burnout, so much. 95% of people in the workforce are considering other jobs right now because of how they feel emotionally, and being burnt out and looking for a better job situation that's going to kind of fit their lifestyle. The number they've called this too, Joe, the silent pandemic. 99% of media is talking about the vaccine and the mask or not to mask, and I'm not going to say anything on either any of that stuff. But what I am going to talk about is the silent pandemic. What no one is talking about, Joe. Addictions have gone through the roof. Domestic abuse has gone through the roof. Depression has gone through the roof. Suicide has gone through the roof. Alcoholism gone through the roof. Our hospital in our town in Colorado Springs, there's a big giant hospital in Colorado Springs that has declared a state of emergency for 10 to 18-year-olds because the amount of depression and suicide among 10 to 18-year-olds. Well, why is that? We're not emotionally healthy. We don't not know how to cope with all the stress and uncertainty and all the stuff that's going on. We don't have the emotional tools to cope and manage with the craziness and the chaos that's going on in the world today.
Well, it's interesting too. I remember listening to that on the news and stuff like that about how kids are having a hard time adjusting when they're back to school now. Some will be going back to school full time in September. But I realized too, watching my son going back to school and how important those social interactions are. Learning that social structure, learning how to deal with people and how to get along with people. It's interesting to watch.
It is so huge. Our social network, and I don't mean social media. Our social network has again, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a psychiatrist. It has a tremendous role and impact to play in our emotional and mental health. If we don't stay intentionally connected, like, think about this, Joe, and we're discovering this stuff. We are literally in a social experiment. When you lock up social and relational human beings for a year plus, the consequences are catastrophic. There's every day there are new numbers of the number of deaths and addictions and depressions and stuff I already got into talking about. And so the importance of staying connected socially and relationally with our friends, our support network, our emotional social support network has never been more critical than in a time where the powers that be are saying, stay away from everybody, lock yourself up, don't go outside, right? Wear your mask, get vaccines, stay, social distancing, all that stuff. The consequences of doing that emotionally and socially are tremendous that no one seems to be talking about for some crazy reason.
Well, it's funny too. Like I was lucky. I was considered essential, so I was working, and I take a week vacation and not really do anything. And I'm excited to go back to the three guys I work with because I miss that social connection.
That's
During
right.
the pandemic, I used to do ride share. I used to do ride share,
Yep.
and especially in that social connection. Because when you go through a traumatic time like a divorce, you lose that social connection with people, and when you go through that, and I swear to God, it helped me through that social connect with the 5 seconds I get to interact with people. 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, 20-minute drive here. I get to listen about fires in Australia. Man, those social connections, it's almost like feeding you food.
That's right, Joe. Sometimes I call it soul food,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like it feeds that social relational dynamic that we have as humans is critical. Now, here's where the danger is. The danger is, again, is coming from where I used to come from that emotionally needy, emotionally unhealthy perspective, where I was again needing emotionally that validation and approval from other people for my identity. That's not healthy. So that's something to be careful of. But there's no question, Joe, that we need each other in our lives, period. And think about this, Joe. Think about this. What is the number one form of, I was going to say torture, but let's call it discipline, for maximum security prisons, Joe? What do?
Solitary confinement.
Solitary confinement. And what have we been doing to everybody in the country and across the globe is solitary confinement in our homes, right?
It's, you always like, I don't know, maybe it's Hollywood. I don't know if real life, because I really don't know. But I'm wondering too, the mental status. You put somebody in the hole for doing something bad in prison, and when they come out, we'll say 10 days, and they're not any better mental shape as they when they went in. Again, I'm only going for what I see on TV. I don't know what's in real life, but I don't think it could be very helpful.
Absolutely not. They let them out for like an hour a day. No, it's not helpful. And again, I have not done any research either. But I just know, okay, well, if there's got to be a reason that they lock someone, they isolate someone, a relational social being, for 23 hours a day for however length of time. We've done it as a nation and as a globe for a year and a half, and maybe going back to more of it. I've got friends in Australia. They're on their fifth lockdown. I got friends in Canada. They're going through another lockdown. It is not emotionally healthy what we're doing to people by saying stay away from each other. Let's lock everyone up in quote unquote solitary confinement. It's not emotionally healthy. So okay, yeah, so people aren't dying of less people are dying from COVID, but more people are dying from depression, suicide, drug addiction, alcoholism. Like, at what point do we realize, okay, guys, we need each other. We need some sort of emotional connection, social connection here. This is not healthy to be locking people up like this.
Well, it's interesting, as you said, alcoholism. It was funny, right there during the beginning of the pandemic, and they were shutting everything down. They extended the hours of the liquor store. That was considered essential. I thought that was a little, like, that was a little bit strange. I mean, I understand that, you're home, might have a couple drinks, maybe relax you, but again, the rise of mental health issues with alcoholism. And it's funny thing, the biggest thing on the news before the pandemic was overdoses from fentanyl and all that other drugs up here. Overdosing, that was a huge thing. It's still a huge thing now, but you didn't hear much about it now because the pandemic kind of overtaken a little bit.
Right. That's right.
Well, another thing too, you have a podcast. What is that about?
So the reason we started the podcast was I told my wife after. So what happened was, so as soon as I started my emotional growth journey, so once my counselor introduced me to feelings and emotions, I started this emotional growth journey. About 2 or 3 years into my emotional growth journey, I'm starting to get, grow and heal a bunch of my emotional injuries, And then I had no idea, Joe, all these areas of my life slowly started to change and improve. My faith started to improve. My marriage started to improve. My parenting started to improve. My financial decisions, my business decisions, my fitness. I've lost 50 pounds.
Oh,
And people
wow.
say, oh, what diet are you using? My emotional fitness plan is what. And they're like, what? I wasn't emotionally healthy. So I didn't realize that I was eating. That was my emotional coping mechanism. That's why I've done 100 diets, Joe. Not even kidding. I've done at least 100 diets that all lasted maybe 3 days if I was lucky. That's if I was lucky. And now I've kept it off for probably 9 months now, which for me is an eternity. I've never kept off this weight for 9 months. That's insane. So, and why? Because I'm emotionally healthier. I'm not needing. Now I still slip up every now and then, but not near what I used to be. But I'm not using food anymore as my emotional coping mechanism. Okay, so all these areas started to grow and change. So what happened was I told my wife, I'm like, babe, I can't be the only emotionally clueless guy out there. There has to be other nobles out there. And so I said, babe, I know I'm going to start a podcast just talking about my emotional growth journey. Not some, hey, I have a PhD from Harvard on emotional behavioral intelligence. No, I'm not. That's not my story. I'm not that guy. I don't have any degrees in this stuff. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a veteran, military veteran. I'm a homeschool dad. I'm a veteran. I'm an entrepreneur, and this is how my emotional growth journey has been impacting me. So it's real, raw, transparent stories of my journey, of my failures, shortcomings, and successes, and what I'm learning along the way. And so we started a podcast. And here's what's crazy, Joe, is we started February of 2020, the same month, plus or minus, that COVID came out, not realizing that emotional health was going to be such a massive topic. And so we started that podcast, and it's, we've had, I guess, I don't know, decent amount of success. And we started as EQ for Entrepreneurs. We literally just this week, Joe, are just doing a rebrand to EQ Gangster. Now it's EQGangster.com. Our podcast is EQ Gangster. And so in our membership, for those that want to be a part of a supportive, growing, safe, trusting group of people, encouraging group of people, community that is all working on their emotional health and emotional intelligence together, it's EQGangster.com/mafia. And that's our community. And that's why we started the podcast, because I was like, man, I want to help out other nobles out there that have been emotionally clueless their whole lives to hopefully so they can get the same transformation in their life that I've been able to experience. I'm upset and frustrated that I didn't do this sooner, but I'm also thankful that I know, Joe, I've heard stories, Joe, of people that are 70, 80 years old that have not talked to a sibling, have not talked to a friend for decades, because they couldn't resolve that conflict that they had 15, 20, 30 years earlier. That's emotional intelligence. That's emotional health. If they were emotionally healthier, they would have been able to navigate some of those challenging relationship issues that we all have. And the healthier emotionally that we are, the more effective we can navigate these relationships in our lives, personally and professionally.
One thing you keep talking about, and I was kind of curious about, is emotional fitness journey. What is that like?
Great question, Joe. You cannot become emotionally healthy by listening to a podcast episode or reading a book on emotional health, just like you can't get in shape by listening to a fitness podcast episode or reading a fitness book. You have to do the work. You've got to exercise. You have to eat right. You have to drink water. You got to sleep right. Your physical fitness, there are a handful of things that you've got to do consistently over time to maintain your physical fitness. The same exact thing has to happen with our emotional fitness and our emotional health. It has to be an ongoing thing that we do implement and apply on a regular basis. And here there are three things I recommend, Joe. I call it going ape, based on that, right? Based on that, that emotional 800-pound gorilla that most of us have, and we don't even realize that we have. This is how we help that 800-pound gorilla start to lose weight and impact in our life, is by going ape. So A is acknowledge the feelings, acknowledge those feelings and emotions. Now, how do you do that? So acknowledging those feelings and emotions, there's a something that you can Google today called emotion wheel.
Mhm.
Emotion wheel. Google that, print that out, stick it on your desk, stick it in your refrigerator, stick it in your office, whatever. And when you acknowledge your feelings, pull that emotion wheel out so you can also expand your emotional vocabulary. I only knew like 5 emotion words: angry, happy, sad, maybe 3 words. I said 5. I like new 3 words. So acknowledge your feelings and emotions, print out that emotion wheel, use that to kind of help figure out and acknowledge what emotions you're feeling. P, permission. Give yourself permission to feel those emotions that you acknowledged in the A category. So acknowledge the feelings and emotions. P, permission to feel those emotions. What I recommend is, it takes our bodies, and I, again, from my research and from learning from psychologists and psychiatrists and stuff, it takes the body 60 to 90 seconds to feel an emotion. So set your alarm. So again, in the permission category, set your alarm, give yourself permission to feel for 60 to 90 seconds those emotions that you acknowledged in that first section there, in the A section. Give yourself permission. So boom, I set my alarm for 60 seconds, and I'm gonna feel angry right now for 60 seconds. Allow yourself to feel angry for 60 seconds. The next emotion that you're feeling is maybe rejection, because I got rejected in a relationship or on a business deal or whatever, right? So, okay, I'm going to set my alarm again, 60 seconds. I'm going to feel rejection for 60 seconds. And then the E is expression. So we got acknowledge, permission. E is expression. Express those emotions on paper. Write them down. Journal. Put in bullets. Make a list of all the emotions that you're feeling in A, in the acknowledge section. In the E section, write those all down. Express them in a journal, or write them down. There's tons of research on the power and effectiveness and the healing that happens when you write down how you're feeling and your emotions and stuff. Now, here's the physiological thing, Joe, that happens when you do this in terms of an emotional fitness program. The physiological thing, the brain is a master organizer. It's a master filer, right? So the brain organizes and files millions of bits of data every single day, and we don't even know what's happening. Just driving down the road. Think about the amount of stimulus that our brain is processing just driving down the road at 10 miles an hour, the amount of data that's coming into our brain. So it's a master filer. So here's what happens, Joe. When the brain can't file or organize something like an emotion, what happens is the longer and the longer and the more that unnamed emotion is bouncing around in our brain and our body, the more stress and anxiety it's going to cause. And it's going to show up somewhere in your life. There's a book that's called The Body Keeps the Score. So
Mhm.
why am I still overweight? Because there's still more emotional stuff I've got to work through, and I've got to fix. That why and that's another thing too with self-awareness. Where are you feeling a particular emotion in your body? Is it in your throat? Is it in your face? Your face gets red. You tense up. You feel it in a pit of your stomach. Where are you feeling what particular emotion? So that's important as well. So what happens is physiologically, when you, and there's a buddy of mine, a special forces buddy of mine just taught me this. When you name an emotion, the brain can tame the emotion. But as long as you can't name or identify what that emotion is, it's going to cause stress and anxiety, which leads to a powerful quote, another quote that I love. Pain and bitterness that's not transformed will be transferred. What that means is pain and bitterness that's not transformed in your life will be transferred somewhere in your life. Now, you may think, oh, Noble, man, you just don't know me. I can stuff and avoid. No. That gorilla is growing. Every emotional injury that we have is feeding that emotional gorilla, and that gorilla is gaining weight and getting bigger and stronger and bigger and stronger until one day it's going to cause havoc somewhere in your life, physically, mentally, emotionally, relationally, socially, financially, business-wise. It's going to show up somewhere in your life. So that emotional fitness program is something, those ape exercises. Listen, you can do that and incorporate those exercises every day. Every day you get something happens, man, I'm getting a little angry, a little anxious, whatever the emotion is, go ape. Do that ape exercise, knock that out, and that will help you to starting getting healthier emotion. And also, something I also recommend, two other things. When you hit an emotion and a connection that came that's from some serious trauma in your life, get professional help. Get a psychologist, get a counselor, get a therapist. Every big baller I know, LeBron James, Richard Branson, all these baller business guys, athletes, they have all kinds of coaches and counselors and therapists. They're nutritionists. Their golf putting coach, their long distance driver coach, their fitness coach, their nutritionist. They know that they need all these smart people in their life. Why doesn't the average person have smart people in their life too that can help them with an emotional fitness trainer, not just a physical fitness trainer, but emotional health? Because if you don't have emotional health, guess what? Your physical fitness is probably not going to go very well, right? So emotional fitness is as important as every other aspect in our life.
Well, that's true. Now we're just, if you really need help, seek a professional counselor. That's kind of like my little thing there too. Like you said earlier, let's seek out a professional if you really do need help. It's really important. There's nothing wrong with it. Some people, especially men, I don't know why men have a problem with it. I don't need help. I can handle this. Well, that's a bunch of, whatever. And I'm like, there's nothing wrong with it. You're not less of a man if you seek help.
That's right. I think you're nuts if you don't get help.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the alternative? Continue to walk around with these unproductive, unhealthy behaviors that make you miserable, that you're continuing to repeat. Like some people, how many people do I know, man? How many people do I know that, well, man, I just keep running into the wrong type of woman, or I keep running into the wrong type of guy, or I keep self-sabotaging. Oh man, I had a PhD in self-sabotage, Joe. Why do we repeat these behaviors? Because there's something deep emotionally that has not been healed or addressed. So, and if you can't fix it on your own through reading books and podcasts and stuff like that, get professional help. But in addition to the professional help, start creating your own emotional fitness program on your own. I got tons of resources I share on our podcast, tons of things. Start taking ownership of not only your physical fitness, but your emotional fitness as well.
Well, it's interesting too. Like wrapping up, I usually ask final thoughts, but I listened to one of your podcasts, and I think there's a good way to end this one. Parenting, and it's a quote from you saying, "Parenting is caught more than taught." What did you mean by that? 'Cause I think it's true, but I want to hear what you have to say.
So think this is a question I love asking parents. Where again, we love homeschooling and very involved in the homeschool community and stuff. And I love asking parents this, because a lot of parents like, I could never homeschool, or that's crazy. You should never homeschool. This is what I love asking parents. What are the top 3 life lessons that you have learned? The top 3 life lessons that you've learned? And that's a great, so just think about that question. Top 3 life lessons. Okay, number 1. Number 2, second question. What are the top 3 life lessons that you want to transfer to your children? Now, it may be the same answer as number 1, and in many cases it is, but it may be different. But the second question, what are the top 3 life lessons that you want to teach your kids? Okay, now those 2 questions. Now let's go back up to the first question. What are what are the top 3 life lessons you learned? My next question to that question is this. You tell me what class you learned that in. 9 times out of 9.5, you never learned it from a class. You never learned it from a textbook. You never learned it from a teacher. A lot of times you learn it through hard knocks, through your family. That's where a lot of times we learn those valuable life lessons. So a lot of times the most powerful, important lessons we've ever learned have not been taught, they've been caught.
Well, it's an example. I used to have a great aunt who was a nun, who, again, always helping people, always talking to people, always nice. And I watched her, and she taught me how to make scrambled eggs. And that's another thing she did. So she was great. She taught me how to treat people, how to play checkers, and made scrambled eggs. I learned a lot from her.
That's awesome. I love it. That's great. That's right.
Also, to where they connect, they want to reach out to you, find out more information about you in what your podcast.
Sure, Joe. Thank you. So I'm sorry, not info. So that was my old one. So the rebrand, so it's Noble, Noble, Noble at EQGangster.com. Noble at EQGangster.com. Also our website, EQGangster.com. I'm also on social media, Instagram. Instagram is at the Noble Gibbens, and it's NobleGibbens. And it's also on Instagram, it's EQ Gangster. And then Facebook, it is the Noble Gibbens as well on Facebook. And because again, we're in the middle of this rebrand. Now, our YouTube channel is still under our old, it's under our new name. So it's EQ Gangster is our YouTube channel as well. So we just put every episode on our YouTube channel as well. So all my interviews, that kind of thing, if you like to watch it, you're visual, you can watch it on YouTube, or again, otherwise it's EQ Gangster or EQGangster.com.
All links will be in the show notes for this episode. I really want to thank you, Noble, for spending time today. I really do appreciate it, sir.
Thank you, Big Joe. I appreciate it, man. You're awesome, brother.
Thank you.